Our next presenter is Dr. Linda Hill from University of California, San Diego.
You don't need to read my intro.
Okay.
Ready.
And I think yours is right there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Thanks for pulling it up.
Absolutely.
All right. So I'm going to do a very fast flyby on the work we've been doing with law enforcement. We've had the privilege of working with the California Highway Patrol and Commissioner Farrow, who have been incredibly supportive of this relationship between academia and driving researchers and law enforcement. And we started our work based on NHTSA's direction that law enforcement needs to do a better job or be able to recognize warning signs. And we talked to law enforcement about what their challenges were, and they said some of the things, especially with older drivers, but not exclusively with older drivers, was how do they distinguish between somebody who's under the influence and somebody who's disoriented? What about other medical conditions that can interfere with driving, and the issues around impairment from medications? And the other problem that they told us about with older drivers is that these stops can be very time-consuming. They don't like them. They'd rather be chasing the younger speeder or, drug dealer or something. They didn't really want to have to deal with the issues, all the things we know about the older driver. It's going to take a long time. And they also told us that even though they have a mechanism for reporting drivers that they're concerned about to the DMV, that they tended to not do this as much with the older driver. That the law enforcement told us they have respect for their elders. They knew that if they reported people, they might not have a way to get to the doctor's office. And they also had some confusion about the mechanism. How does the DMV want to hear about these cases? We've been working with physicians for about 15 years. And as you know, some states in the United States have mandated reportings, but the majority do not. But in the mandated reporting states, physicians are also unaware of reporting mechanisms. So we were able to build on some of that experience. Law enforcement also told us that nobody had been training them on older driver issues, and they certainly didn't know how to handle confused and disoriented drivers. They also told us, don't make us do any memory tests at the roadside. That's not going to happen if it involves a pencil and paper or something like a word recall. And they also said, we're very distractible learners. You better make this interesting. You better have a lot of videos. I was like, oh, I've been there. I've been trying to train docs for 15 years. You want to talk about a distractible group. They're, constantly checking their iPhones and thinking about something else. So that was no problem. We were like, okay, we know how to do that. We also knew that with the docs, we had to get docs to talk to them. With law enforcement, we wanted law enforcement officers to do our training, so we hired CHP officers who have retired, who had worked in older driver safety to be our trainers, and we've done a train-the-trainer model. The other thing that was really important to the officers was that the training be post-certified, so that's peace officer standardized training. And what that means is when you gave the officers the training, they got credit for it, sort of like docs getting CME. And then we also had to have a shorter version of the training available because, like everybody, time's really short. There's not enough training hours, and so we want a short version. So I'm going to give you a very fast flyby of the kinds of things we talked to them about. So this is just to say we have both a 2-hour and a 30-minute training for officers that finally got developed after all of our work. We talked to them about the things you would expect, the aging population, the increase in older drivers, the way older adults like to drive themselves, but then we talk about health and aging concerns. We are always careful to point out that these medical problems are not just in older drivers, but it can occur in anybody. And then we give them examples of what it looks like to somebody whose vision's 20/20, what it looks like to people who have visual field defects, people who have macular degeneration, so they can have an appreciation for why somebody they stopped may have some really significant problems. We give them an idea of how would you figure out somebody's having significant vision problems. Well, this is what it would look like. We also talk to them about frailty and this kind of data that we've been talking about today, the issue around increase crash deaths for a crash that wouldn't necessarily kill a younger person. And why is this relevant to the officers is because that's going to be a crash that they're going to spend a lot more time with because an older person's involved who's having problems. So we talk to them about what frailty red flags might look like. We give them videos, examples, somebody with Parkinson's and so on. And then we talk to them about what we call DUID, or driving under the influence of dementia, and just give them an idea of, what is dementia. We're not doing a medical school course, but we just want to sort of get everybody caught up, and what it might look like for them if they stopped somebody going the wrong way on a street, and what might clue them in that this person may be having cognitive problems. We also talk about other things that they may come across, again, not just in the older driver. And certainly, for example, in diabetes, they're going to see this in the younger driver, and you don't want an officer to miss hypoglycemia and put somebody handcuffed in the back seat of their car when their sugars are very low. The medication and driving issue is a big thing for them. As I said, they're often having to distinguish between DUI and medications. In California and elsewhere, if somebody's driving under the influence of a prescription medication, they can be charged as well. So there are many issues around that. We briefly go over potential effects of medications. And then lastly, they asked us to help distinguish between the person who was driving under the influence and the person who was disoriented to person, place, and time. So we knew from medicine that disoriented to person, place, and time was a way of identifying somebody who was cognitively impaired, at least at that moment in time. And the officers were comfortable with that. These are often questions that they ask anyway. We were just putting this in context for them so they would be able to interpret what it means and kind of understand what was going on. We know when the officer stops somebody who's having a driving infraction and looks confused that they have to rule out impairment first. We gave them 9 screening questions to orientation to person, place, and time, and we gave them scoring criteria so they'd have an idea of whether they needed to report that person. Orientation to person, place, and time is well established in medicine, but we knew the officers would want to know that this had been a validated tool, so we put the questions in the order we were using them and sent them off to our dementia research unit, and they, of course, confirmed for us that people who are not demented do very well on orientation. And just so you know, the San Diego police gave us the opportunity to test orientation to person, place, and time in people who were under the influence. They were doing a DUI training for their officers, and they systematically got volunteers drunk so that their officers could practice DUI assessments, and they let us come in and do our thing. It turns out you can be pretty inebriated and you still know who and where you are. So we go over this training, we give them their questions, and after doing this for about 3 years, we got very good feedback from the officers. We went out on ride-alongs with them. We did interviews with officers who had been using the tool. We got a lot of feedback on the training. So we developed a phone app for the officers. We now make this available as freeware across the country so that officers can use this on their phone, and this data gets pushed to us anonymously. So we're just in the process of setting up the push. So I don't have any of that data, but it's a very easy to use. The officer just clicks the questions, it gives them some guidance, it tells them how many they missed. We also wanted to give the officers an example of a roadside stop with an older person, so we got this wonderful actor and a real officer who was just incredibly helpful and also a really respectful person modeling that road stop of somebody who's lost and confused and using the tool to assess them. We've gotten really good evaluation from the officers. They say that it's helped them in their roadside assessment. It's helped them in reporting to the DMV. They said that they hadn't had this kind of training before. They didn't know what the issues were. They were really happy to have this, and then 2 years later, they said it was useful. So we knew that at some point we were going to have to do something to scale up. California has 35 million people and 7,200 CHP officers. So a couple years ago, we went to a train-the-trainer model. CHP has PIOs, public information officers, who do training around the state. So we went to the model where we trained the PIOs. And now we have every single district in the state of California trained on this curriculum, post-certified, and now the officers can go out and deliver it. We did a video of my part, which is the medical part, so that they would have that as well. And now that's going out. We have developed videos that officers can access by phone, so that if they didn't happen to go to a training, they can access our videos by phone. And these videos support the use of the tool and support the training in general. It's not just about highway patrol. We know that other police are going to come across the impaired driver, the disoriented driver, and so on. It has been a little bit harder to work with local law enforcement because they're more about crime, highway patrol is more about traffic. Nonetheless, they have been really great partners, and the chiefs of police of both local law enforcement, San Diego PD, for example, and the Sheriff's Department have been really embracing the kind of training. So I think my conclusions follow just what we talked about, and I know I'm out of time, so I want to leave some time for questions.
Any questions for Dr. Hill?
In your research, have you been able to follow any? Oh, sorry. In your research, have you been able to follow any of the older drivers referred for re-exam based on the DOSI results to see what actually happens when they're called in and evaluated?
Well, I knew you were going to ask that question, because of course that's what we've been trying to get. This is very difficult to get that data. We have been unsuccessful. That's the big one.
Any other questions?